regarding third culture. So this is Jules. She's the writer-director of Toshi, the first film clips that we saw. I think there's other clips that would really show you. I mean, it's how the stories kind of intertwine but not in more in a real life sort of way. But anyway, that was her project. We have Jennifer Sir, obviously, you and me both. And there's Eric Reed, the producer of Discovering Gochujang. He also produced Kimchi Chronicles a little while back. So yeah, we're really happy to have him here. If we could give him a little round of applause. So, I mean, just to kick off the dialogue, like what I don't know, like what kind of inspired you to do these things? Was it something that you're thinking about, like just culturally or personally, or were there some kind of creative hurdles in trying to put a project together such as yours?
Being an immigrant myself, I came to this country when I was 8, and I was always like fascinated with like stories, immigrant stories, and I find a lot of myself in Julian, the African American teen, as well as Sergio, the Mexican cab driver. Yeah, but I feel like I took a lot of risks. Like, just these were first-time actors. They weren't really actors, and such a low budget. But just even from the locations that we chose, like the air train. I mean, it just everything that I did was like risk-taking, and you just have to be fearless, And it was a lot of fun, though. It was like probably the most fun I've had, even though it was really challenging. But I feel like if you guys want to make a film, you just have to really grind, because nobody else is going to make that film but you. And yeah, so.
All right. Well, yeah. Next, Jennifer.
So with this film, everything, the story is fictional, but it is inspired by a lot of things that I've been personally touched by, sort of opiate addiction being one of them, and I think people hopefully are understanding that it's such a huge issue right now, and it's something that's really spreading, and so it's something that I wanted to talk about, and also, I guess, just with, I thought it was, there is also, especially people around my age, is a large Korean adoptee population. Again, I'm not adopted, so this is all sort of me fictionalizing a lot of things that I'm interested about, which I thought it was a real thing that sort of gives these characters something very specific to sort of be discussing and a good lens to sort of talk about addiction and even sort of family and differences. As I said too, it's kind of me. The emotional core, just talking about sibling relationship was very important to me, but then in sort of constructing this particular story, I guess it really was combining a lot of experiences, whether it is I just come off a series of road trips and all of that, and really, I don't know, really pushing to try to make something that felt specific to me as a Korean American in a lot of ways. I did grow up in the Midwest, again, I wasn't adopted, so just kind of drawing on a lot of things. I think that is a good thing we should be doing as Asian American filmmakers, is really trying to be as specific as possible telling these kinds of stories. And obviously, I guess the challenge is that because there aren't a lot of stories like this, it's just there's no proof of concept. So we've been lucky enough to be supported by Tribeca Film Institute, Film Independent, and we've done a number of labs and done a lot of markets and trying to meet people. And of course, you get a lot of like, oh my gosh, I love Constance and whatever. But then like, when it comes to like, oh, are you going to support the project? Do you have any money? Yeah, a lot of it is like, oh, it's too small, which, I understand they have to look out for the bottom line and et cetera, but it really is sort of testament to like the importance of community support, because I think, having talked to a lot of good amount of Asian American filmmakers at this point too, just sort of, how did you make your movie? Oh my God, it seems so impossible, we can't do it. It's really, that seems to be sort of the thing that they all find in people who care about the same thing, so.
Eric.
I forgot the question. What was the question?
We all answered different things.
I mean, just, obviously you got a lot of cultural elements flowing in there. Like, how did that come about? Is that like your thing, or like,
So I did a series called Kimchi Chronicles, which was like my attempt, or our attempt, to share Korean food with the world. And some people liked it, some people didn't like it. But one of the things that happened more recently is, food in general is becoming more popular. Food media is becoming more popular. And so one of the things that just came across my desk was, well, there's an opportunity to sort of share culture through food, right? So how many of you have ever gone out and someone just says, oh, can you take me to Korean barbecue? And I'm like, I don't need to take you to Korean barbecue. You can just go yourself. But I think that people kind of want this guide, like hand-holding in new experiences and new food experiences. And so, gochujang just came across my way because people love it, but they don't know how to talk about it. People don't know how to cook with it. And so I just think that if you could, I can't share with you all the culture that I've learned in my life, because whether it's, my mom's disciplining of how much homework and studying I had to do, I can't share that necessarily, but I could share food pretty easily. And it seems that today, in today's world, people are more likely to try a bite of something from your culture than to necessarily truly understand your roots or your political or values. But I can share a piece of kimchi pretty easily and at least start the conversation about, well, where does that food come from, and how do you feel about the flavor of this food? And so hopefully this project can lead to more conversations about all types of food from all cultures, and I think you'll see that over the course of the next few years is short films about specific niche types of food, hopefully sharing more about the culture. And the cool thing about what we did was the only Korean person who wasn't, Edward Lee is Korean, but he lives in Kentucky, and he associates himself more as a Southerner, like a Southerner from America, than he does a Korean. But everyone in the project was non-Korean and probably trying gochujang for the first time. So we wanted to sort of share that exploration through the visual, and hopefully it made you guys hungry. I don't think we have Korean food today, we have sandwiches, but that was the whole point.
All right, well, going back down the line with you guys, and maybe Eric can start off this time. What do you see in the, for lack of a better word, in the media these days? What's the environment like? Is there enough stuff that interests you out there, or how would you fit in there? Obviously, you spoke about it a little bit, but.
This is going to get a little bit serious, but so there was a recent video, I don't know if you guys know, but it's more targeted towards Chinese Americans, but it was this Jesse Waters Fox clip that you guys have seen. And it was this video that Jesse Waters, he goes to Chinatown and he basically makes fun of Chinese people. And, obviously that's offensive. And, for me, it was, even as an Asian American, we all get grouped in the same circle. So if somebody attacks any kind of Asian person, I sort of take it upon myself to sort of think of how can we respond as a community. So the problem I had, obviously I had a problem with Jesse Waters, but when I saw sort of the feedback on Facebook, the feedback of people supporting Jesse versus upset at Jesse, certainly there were more people upset in terms of the commentary, but the number of people that sort of click the casual like button on Facebook to the racist video is alarming, right? So in America, I would think that, yes, we're comfortable here in New York, people are diverse, in Williamsburg, nobody is really, looking at you weird, but in the rest of America, I don't necessarily think that's the case. And so my personal agenda, my hope is that through films that hopefully can be relatable, through food, really, for me, is sort of my forte, is that we could sort of solve some of these cultural misunderstandings and eventually live in a world where at least we can talk about kimchi without judging each other. But right now, we're still decades away from that kind of acceptance. And so, I see stuff like Jesse Waters and people making fun of it, and I want to, I don't want to create negative video. I want to create a more positive video about how cool Korean food is, how cool Chinese food is, and how there's more chefs. And I was on a panel on Monday with a bunch of Chinese American chefs, and they share the same sentiment where it's, hey, Chinese food is perceived as cheap, right? And so how can we elevate it? And there's a lot of work to do among the community to sort of improve the experience and the front of the house and all that stuff, but we also need to create more media out there that sort of opens people's minds a little bit. And so when you see so one Portuguese and one, sort of New York-born chef cooking with gochujang, hopefully that sort of says, wow, gochujang isn't just for white people or Korean people, it's for everybody.
So are you talking about in terms of Asian American media that like
Just
started?
anything.
More refined. Well, I agree with Eric in terms of like I feel like we are sort of decades behind in terms of really having, obviously the exposure and the number and the diversity of narratives that speak to an Asian American experience sort of out there. I came for Bad Rap yesterday, and it was funny to see that when Dumbfounded was talking about rap battles and how people, it's really sort of easy for him in some ways because people always insult the same things. It's like people really have a very limited understanding of what, and Asian Americans or Korean Americans or whatever, so it's like the same kinds of jokes about like chop suey or whatever, these things that have been around for a long time. And
You're talking about specifically the battle rap
yeah.
community, where two rappers get out and battle against each other.
Well, but even that video you're talking about on the Fox video too, it's like, okay, it's like these are the jokes that we've heard for 30 years or whatever, and it speaks to, obviously, like ignorance on the part of people who don't want to know more specifics about certain cultures or populations, but that is sort of the dominant narrative. And, as a filmmaker, I feel like it's tricky because it's like I support Asian American filmmakers, but at the same time, it's because there's not enough diversity of narratives, I find myself identifying a lot more with, even shows like Transparent or Atlanta or whatever, these other shows that are out there that have these very specific things than I do with what so far we've been able to put out as Asian Americans, or just it doesn't draw me as much to those narratives. So I think that I think that comes with time and more exposure and more opportunities to make things. But even or Asian films, obviously, like Korean films and stuff like that, I watch a lot of those, and stylistically and narratively, those really draw me more. So I think it's just a matter of process for us to really put our specific voices out there and obviously like make the narrative more broad.
Right. So even within the Asian American community, you're saying it's not really diverse in terms of what we've been putting out so far.
I think there's an opportunity there to push more.
Right, there's an opportunity to push more. And Mark, by the way, if you want to, you can bring the camera anywhere. Feel free to roam around anywhere. Okay, Jules?
Sorry, you were just asking.
Yeah, just what do you see out there in the media or different kinds of entertainment?
I mean, I made this film because I felt like I couldn't really relate to a lot of films that were like, European films. I mean, people that weren't, that,
European films?
I
or
mean, not
European
European,
American?
I'm sorry, just like watching Caucasian.
You were European American.
Yeah. I mean, I just felt like every movie, there's so many movies that, I just wanted to preserve culture, I guess, mainly, when I made this film, like preserving African American culture, Korean, Mexican, and that's what I wanted to see myself, so that's why I made my film. Sorry, I'm just being...
Yeah, right. But you're saying you don't see that in predominant American...
Like a lot of indie films that come out of Brooklyn, like it's just your typical, I can't really relate to a lot of them.
So not just the
Because of
mainstream,
culturally,
but you're saying even like this Brooklyn indie film scene?
Yeah,
You're kind
yeah.
of seeing the same thing, or?
Yeah, it's, I don't know, I don't mean to sound jaded, but I'm just being honest. And I just wanted to create my own media, my own, world of like what I could relate to, what I'm about, so.
Well, we also want to open this up to the audience, so are there any kind of comments or questions or feedback? And we do have some of the filmmakers who are participating in the festival here as well. I'd like to point out, this is Albert with Inner Place, who's screening that at 5 p.m. today. We have James Choi here from Chicago. He'll be screening his film Empty Space at 2:30. We have Shirley as well. All Men Are Flowers. Does anybody have any, comments or feedback? Okay.
There was an article a while ago there was an article a while ago about Korean Americans and Asian Americans who go back to Asia because they say, I only live once, and if I can't be a pop star here, if I can't be, I want to be an actor and not play stereotypical roles. So they end up going overseas and have fantastic success. And actually 2 of the girls in Girls' Generation, 2 of the 4 are Americans. So I guess I was wondering if that was ever an option for any of you.
I was actually considering going to Korea to make my other feature film, but I don't think that I'm ready for that yet, because I'm writing my next feature film, and it's about a Korean woman, but she's from Korea, and a Caucasian male that it takes place like in this whole I don't know if you ever heard of Shambhala Center, but it's like a very spiritual kind of
Shambhala
world, and like it's a whole different thing, but it's just
Will you
I was
shoot that
considering
here?
that at one point, but just I feel like there's a lot of stories, narratives here to explore, at the moment. So, yeah, it's a good question.
I mean, for me personally, I have not. I mean, my Korean's pretty terrible, and that would be just a logistical thing. Though I do know that a lot of these, I know producers and people who come in. Obviously, it's a skill that can be acquired, and something that so it's not obviously prohibitive in itself. But I do think, sort of my perspective. I grew up in the Midwest, and I definitely feel distinctly Asian American, and I don't necessarily feel like I have stories that would feel, I feel more of a fish out of water in Korea for sure than I would, even how I felt growing up in the Midwest in a 90% white town. Obviously that was also a fish out of water experience, but specifically my stories just feel set here, and as a filmmaker, I don't know, it would be difficult for me, especially to adapt to Korea because of the language and a number of things.
Food television, really, and storytelling through food was in Spain. And then I sort of felt an obligation, mostly to my mother, to do it, to follow the same format and go to Korea. And probably had one of the most stressful experiences as an American producer going to Korea because, my mom, so I was embarrassed at my mom's food growing up, because it smelled, nobody liked it. I grew up in a very predominantly white neighborhood, and so when I had friends come over, I used to get mad at my mom. I said, Mom, why are you cooking that? I have friends coming over. And so, fast forward, I'm coming to New York, and Korean food's pretty popular, and I sort of, Kimchi Chronicles is almost like a homage and an apology to my mom. But at the same time, to do that project, I went to Korea. My mom sent me to Korean school forever, so my Korean's actually pretty good. So I went over to Korea as sort of like, hey, this is going to be great. Like, I'm the American guy that comes in and speaks Korean, so I'm going to totally relate. Problem is, when you go to Korea and you start speaking Korean, they start treating you like a Korean, and then they start expecting you to be Korean, and so then I stopped speaking Korean because they thought I was being rude and offensive because my Korean wasn't perfect, my business Korean wasn't perfect. I didn't bow at every meeting. I mean, I bowed, but it was just like maybe I didn't bow enough. But I would say that I started using a translator in the middle of the experience because I would get more respect if I didn't speak Korean. And so I started using a translator and played like I played a sort of an American producer that didn't speak Korean, even though I am Korean. So it's troubling because the intentions are all there, and then over there it's sort of a different culture. And to answer your question going forward, I want to go to Asia, but I think there's more work to be done here to try to bridge it from an American perspective, and so I don't see my value that much. I don't see my value in Korea as much as it is here. So I'll probably never go back to do work in Korea.
Anybody else have something from the audience? Or, Shirley?
I just have a perspective on it because I did shoot my short film both I shot, my short film both in South Korea and in LA, and I did experience as a woman director how it is to shoot, in South Korea, and I think LA set culture is different than like Atlanta, for example. People talk about how set culture is very different, even within the states. And in South Korea, I think in my experience, the set culture has specific kind of set culture, and I think there's definitely challenges, that comes with it. And I think if you come from, I think what you said is in like people's expectations when you come from the States and you speak pretty Korean, but then the way you deal with in business situations, there are certain expectations that you don't meet, so you just have to so I think it's something that I think about, but I think it's better to establish the career here first and then I don't know, get respect and then go back and make stuff. I don't know, it's something that I think about, but yeah, anyway.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I mean, we can open this up, so it's not necessarily meant to be like an all up here thing, it's kind of around 360. So, James or Albert, I mean, their films as well. I mean, Albert, grew up in Canada, right? And then he went to Korea to shoot his film, In Her Place. It's done pretty well. So, yeah, I don't know, maybe if you got an observation.
Yeah, for me it was, I was born and raised in Toronto, and I'm Korean Canadian, and every film I had made it was Canadian films. So to kind of get away from myself and kind of introduce myself to my culture, I wanted to make a film in Korea. My Korean is okay, but it was also, for me creatively, it was just to get out of my comfort zone so that I could kind of revert back to kind of tried and true methods of how I make movies. And through that, so I went to Korea, I didn't know anybody there, and it was pretty tough, but from my experience, my Korean's okay, but it's not great. So when I went there, it was very much, they knew I was an outsider. And I think I try to make that work to my advantage, because there are, like you were saying, there's some business practice things. There's, a lot of things are very different. And my parents are still very Korean, so I kind of knew of that culture. But to go in there as a person that is saying from the get-go that I'm from Canada, I don't know your system, but this is how we're going to do it. And right from the beginning, I was like, if you're on board, you're on board. If you're not, you're not. But we're not gonna have a song and dance thing. So I was able to kind of weed out people that were possibly going to be troublemakers. So I actually had a pretty great experience, and I used my deficiency in language to my advantage. There were times when the actors would come up to me and they'd be like, you could tell they wanted to ask me about like why I wanted it done a certain way, or what exactly are you trying to do with this. And then they would look at me and they would realize, oh, he's not going to understand anyway, so never mind, I'll just do it the way you want me to. And, I got out of a couple of jams that way. So, yeah.
That is interesting though, because I've noticed like watching different films that are directed by the non-native person, whether it's like a European American directing like, I don't know, some kind of Thai something or whatever, like it tends to come off a little bit more authentic a lot of times than if you were like actually the hyphen in. Because you kind of like, you don't deal with all that, you just kind of like deal with the final product rather than, and sometimes when it gets too heady like that, like it just comes off cheesy, right? So sometimes it could be a benefit to not know the language. But I also wanted to pass the mic maybe to James Choi there with Empty Space. Should be screening at 2:30 today, and his film, which is a total like micro budget. I think he shot it in 11 days or something for like $7,000. But cinematically amazing performances, scripts, like as tight as anything professional, like Hollywood or whatever. So, but your film has two European Americans in the lead. So if you could just speak to the third cultural aspect of that.
Sure. Well, just commenting on what you guys were talking about as well, I do think it's interesting to, like, I think traveling has a way of connecting people just as much as food. I think food is definitely right there. And so I think the idea of making American, like, I've made an American film in Shanghai, and I'd like to make an American film in Korea, where it's sort of, you know, you're bringing American sort of sensibilities, which we have because we grew up here, and then bringing it into another culture and opening that up, because I don't think people in America travel enough. I don't really think they know what other cultures even look like, let alone how people are in different places. And I think doing that through this narrative medium, this fictional medium, I think as a filmmaker, it's like you go to these places and aesthetically, it's just, it opens it up for you as well as the possibilities that it can do for your audience. So anyways, I think that's really great. My film is in the Midwest, in the rural small towns, but you know, it just deals with being accepted and figuring out how to love people beyond just the surface. But I think even that is interesting. I think there isn't enough. I don't think people that live in major cities like LA, New York, have any real understanding of what the middle of the country is like, nor do we even have any desire to. So I think it's a good way to get some insight into people. I mean, I think that's what, you know, as they were saying up front, I think that's super important that we do that through this medium and this platform. So.
All right. Other questions or comments from the audience?
So like, as something to share, like with the gochujang. So when my father and my family came to Florida, we used to live in Florida, and then there were like Brazilian communities, and one of my neighbors had a Brazilian chef, and so my father like made a rib out of like gochujang sauce that he made. Like it was, I think we never had it before. Like it was like his own creation kind of. And we gave it to the Brazilian family, and they loved it, even though it was really spicy. And so like even like he was a chef and he liked it, so like my dad is still proud of that. So on that kind of note, like I mean, you show that like I didn't watch the Kimchi Chronicle, but it seems like you're promoting like a Korean food and everything, like a traditional food. But I feel like I think some of the problems that Korean food has is like they're not changing enough. I feel like they're not really going forward, rather than they're just kind of staying behind rather than going forward. So I guess my question is like, would you be interested? Like, are you like in the future? Would you like to films on like fusion that involve like Korean food or anything like that?
It's a good question. So when it comes to food, the word authenticity is very controversial because what is authentic Korean food, right? And so over in Korea, this is another difference between American and Korea is Korean food in Korea, and there's like kind of like the traditional authentic way to do it. And if you deviate from that, all of a sudden it's not Korean food, and you can't call it Korean food. They just call it fusion, right? So in America, you know, it's a very exciting time. American food is being redefined in terms of what qualifies as American food right now. So I actually think, like, for example, like a kimchi bulgogi taco, is that Mexican food? Is that Korean food? Is it American food? What is it, right? I think in looking back from here, but looking backwards in 20 years from now, it's going to be called American food. And it should be, because it's part of American food. Like, Italian food is still called Italian food in America, but when there's fusion of Italian with, other stuff, it's called American food. So if you watch the rest of it's online for free. If you watch the rest of it, one of the chefs makes a gazpacho with gochujang because that's what he knows. He's Portuguese and he knows gazpacho, and he goes, hey, gochujang would work really well with gazpacho. So the other chef, Bryce Schumann, he's a Michelin star chef in New York, and he's never really cooked with gochujang, but when he tasted it, he sort of said, you know what, this is going to be really good on a mackerel. And Edward sort of says, you know what, this is kind of like what my grandma would make. And so it's interesting to see that Korean grandma who sort of knows traditional Korean food will cook gochujang with mackerel, right? And the Michelin star chef from New York City on 57th Street also wants to cook mackerel with gochujang. So I don't know. I don't know the answer of, do I want to keep promoting? I just want to promote good flavors, and hopefully you'll accept more cultures because the food from that culture is good. And you mentioned Brazilian. My wife and I went a year and a half ago, and we didn't know much about Brazilian cuisine except for the churrascaria, which is their barbecue. But when you go there, man, there's so much more food out there. And we brought some spices back, and we start using those spices, whether it's with our karabi or tacos or just steak. So I don't know. That's the cool thing about food is you can mix it, and if you like it, then nobody else can judge you on that. And so hopefully through food we can understand cultures and be more accepting of cultures.
Any other comments? Back up.
Hi, I just wanted to go back to what Jules said regarding the independent film scene and also the stories that we can relate to. As Korean American filmmakers, as Asian American filmmakers, clearly we have a lot of stories still to tell about our experiences and culture. But as we see with kind of like a lot of topics, do you think that some of the stories we're telling now and will continue to tell will get repetitive and stale within the next 5, 10, 15 years? And do you have an opinion on how we can it may still be culture and our experiences and perspective, but how do we keep it fresh in a way that, as filmmakers, is appealing to the people that we're trying to reach out to?
I think that we have to just be very mindful of other cultures and like how is this film gonna be still relevant in the next 10 years? Stylistically, I think that you have to, because everybody's a filmmaker and you have to be really like have a really nice unique style and like I mean I wasn't getting off track, but I think just living in such a diverse culture nowadays, like it's just, why aren't more filmmakers making stories about different cultures? It's like that should have, like, why is it so focused on, like, I see a lot of filmmakers making films about kind of like their own life stories, and like I felt like in my film I wanted to make a story that everybody could relate to, like different cultures. I always like keep that in mind. It's not me, it's not just about me. I always think about the broader picture of like who like I want to attract, and like is this relatable, like how relatable is it? And also like keeping a nice, like, I don't know, like just having your own unique style, of making, whether it's production design or just, unique camera styles, and like, I think that's really important.
I think the style thing is an interesting point for sure. But behind that, the style, I don't know, I'm a filmmaker too. Like, style is pretty much what you get last. You have to learn all the other things, right? And the style is what comes out afterwards. But I think it's important to acknowledge that if your purpose is your intention is to reach out to certain kinds of people and give them this experience, then the style that comes out later will be probably consistent with what that intention was. Right? So when Jules is talking about style, it's also, I think, focused on intention. Right? I don't know, but yeah.
Just having your own, unique sense of like vision, just not that it looks like every other film.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I just have a thought. I mean, I do think that we do see some repeat narratives sort of in Asian America. If you go to film festival and And a lot of it does focus on sort of intergenerational conflict, which I think is, and believe me, I made a film that was about a delivery boy in New York City and his relationship with his father, and it's something that I think that we feel very personally in our own lives, and I think that it's a story that I think people do connect to. I don't think it's a stale storyline, but I also think it's something that will hopefully come with time, but also is something we should push beyond, because of these people, we have a relationship with their parents, but we also have relationships with our friends, each other, ourselves. With my film, my sister is actually one of my most important relationships in my life, and kind of almost in my adult life has had more of an impact on who I am than I would say my parents to a certain degree. So it was, for me, more important to do something that expands it, and I think looking at yourself as being specific to sort of your viewpoint, I think will sort of expand what constitutes an Asian American storyline. I do think we're sort of in the early stages. I actually was talking to a guy who sort of defined himself as, he came from Korea, but he's been in the States for 30 years, and when he was listening to my storyline, he was sort of like, oh, that's sort of interesting, because it's kind of like, well, he was first worried that because my story has this opiate addiction, heroin angle, that that there's a potential for Asian Americans or people to sort of see it as shameful and whatever, but the sort of conversation moved on to that to also be like, almost being a reflection of the progress or the time that we as a population have been in the States to sort of be able to have, whether it's pro or con, like that addiction is now something that like affects our community, or that there are other things that are affecting our community that are not just sort of a culture clash. So I thought that was an interesting point, because I was like, oh, right, he didn't necessarily like respond to that experience as not his own, but at the same time he sees it sort of as, I guess this is all to say sort of the time angle, and the more we are sort of reflecting on the changes within our community as well, I think the storylines could be expanded. I don't know. Sorry, just like jump on that one.
Yeah, so it seems like, there's kind of 2 points of view here. One is Jules is really, I mean, it could be the same thing at the end of the day, but like Jules is kind of saying that you look at like what can be relatable to like as many people. Like, I just want to reach out to like all these different communities. Jennifer's saying maybe just actually being super specific and personal could actually become more universal ultimately. Because, yeah, I mean, obviously you're just not defined totally by being from this culture and that culture. There's things that are universal that are going on, that are issues with people. Yeah, so.
People fall in love with movies with like characters oftentimes. Well, I don't know, I think if you look back at the movies, you sort of fall in love, obviously there's style and aesthetics and whatever, but also you fall in love with characters, I think, and sort of situations, experiences. So I think that's important to remember, sort of, and it's something that I try to remind myself is about, like, that's a lot of times what you remember from a movie like Big Lebowski or whatever. You remember Jeff Bridges as sort of like being this incredible character. I mean, that's not every movie, obviously. There's all these different types of movies that are not that way, more like realism or whatever, but I think that's something that is interesting to focus on as well.
Okay, this has been a great talk. We want to keep it going. We had a little bit of technical issues with the live stream. We have 2 live streams available, and we have video as well, so we'll be putting that up. I guess we should maybe end with a closing remark, because this is the first year of Kaffny as a third culture cinema specifically. So in this third culture thing, if you grew up with the tension, if you experienced personally like the tension of 2 cultures, that can easily kind of rip someone in two. There's a lot of identity issues. I think that's where you get a lot of those identity movies in like Asian American film or whatnot. But that can, maybe limit you in terms of like, because your story is always in the context of a larger oppression. But when we're talking about third culture, it's like, okay, the sum of 2 parts are not just half of this and half of that, but it's actually a whole nother thing. I mean, how important do you think that is to just cinema as a whole? Like, it could be in an American context, but I mean, is it out there, or where do you see it? Just maybe a couple of parting words.
To me, third culture is sort of the culture that I'm sort of gonna set up. I have an 11-month-old daughter, and so third culture is the question I ask myself in terms of what is the world in which my daughter grows up in terms of her identity, because I'm not super Korean, nor am I fully American. There's a little bit of both, and Marja von Gersten, who was in Kimchi Chronicles, she was asked, because she was an adopted, her mother's Korean, her father was African American, and she was adopted and then sort of reunited with her birth mother. And she was asked the question on a panel when we were going around promoting the show, and she said, "Hey, are you like 50% Korean or 50% American? And like, are you 50-50?" And she came up with one of the best responses that I've seen and heard is, she's like, "I'm 100% American and I'm 100% Korean." And so when you have 100% of two cultures, I think that's, to me, what third culture is. And so the question for me is, how do I communicate that to my daughter, who, again, I'm not an immigrant. My parents are the immigrants. And so third culture is eventually going to come back down to probably, for my daughter, it's probably too deep, but probably just a singular culture of being American and trying to redefine being American and having that culture mean a lot more, but identifying more as an American than trying to choose between Korea versus America.
Just a couple words.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was a great answer. I mean, in terms of does it actually exist or is it out there? I mean, I think it's definitely out there. Obviously, I think it's a really cool shift that Kaffny is doing. And sort of from my experience, since I was actually most interested in identity politics when I was growing up from an African American perspective. So I was an ethnicity, race, immigration major in college, and when I was in high school, I was like, this is a white suburban school. We had to pick an autobiography. I was reading like autobiography of Malcolm X while everybody was reading like John Adams or whatever. And it was because like to a certain degree I didn't really understand that much about Asian American identity politics. It was sort of new as a sort of, but it was a way to start sort of looking at the sense of sort of identity politics from a movement that was just a little bit more rich to me and more accessible to me in that point of time, just because I didn't know about, in college, and I was able to learn about, Asian American identity, the history of it, and all of that. But I guess to speak to third cultures, I think there's something that really resonated to me, even though I'm not African American certainly, and I don't have that same experience. But I do think that there's something universal in that sort of otherness or being not part of the majority that I think we can all share in. So I think does it exist? Yeah, and I think that bridge is very natural. I was a part of a Diverse Women in Media residency last year, and I felt like, even though the women were Latina, like African American, all different types, it was such a wonderful community to be part of. People in media who are sort of pursuing the same things, even though they have different cultural backgrounds. There's so much that we share sort of by just being diverse women pursuing the same thing that I felt a kinship more towards that. So I think making that bridge is important.
I mean, we're sort of like forced into these different cultures, especially living in New York, right? It's different, like such a multicultural world that we live in, and I feel like I just wanted to say something brief, but like going forward, the films that I want to make in the future, I think it's going to be pretty much like with the theme of third culture, like just I think that it's just I want to make narratives that are like just in a broader sense, like that that have a broad appeal. So yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you again to everybody for showing up and participating. We still have a full day of programming. 2:30 will be James Choi's film. We would love for you to stick around. And then 5 o'clock will be Albert Shin's film, Inner Place. And then 7:30 will be the closing film. Josh Kim is not in attendance, but that's How to Win at Checkers. And those films are also all in competition for Best Third Culture feature. And hopefully this conversation helps us kind of have a better understanding of what that is. And it's not about, so our festival is not about like, this is the best film. Like, that's fucking stupid. Like, seriously, that's fucking stupid. We're about like, okay, what's the film that kind of helps us understand third culture or advance things or progress things in a certain way that we haven't really understood it before. So, you know, that's kind of what we're operating under, and especially the shorts competition, you know, a committee from our staff will be deciding that within the coming week or two, but using this conversation as a way to understand that. And of course, tonight is the closing party at Halcyon, just right around the corner. It's a really cool like record store / bar cafe. So yeah, 10 o'clock, we'll be there, just hanging out and closing out the festival. But thanks again for everybody for coming out.